You're 19, dragging heavy oak brush into a roaring wood chipper in the July heat for $18.72 an hour, the current average hourly pay for a tree groundsman in the United States. Your boots are filled with sweat, your shirt is pasted to your spine, and the chipper is so loud you can't hear your own thoughts. Most days you're moving logs that flirt with 100 pounds, sprinting to keep up with a crew that treats you like a disposable part. And if you're lucky, you edge up toward $20 an hour while the company bills the homeowner 5 figures for the job. In this trade, the stakes are not abstract. Federal fatality data shows tree trimmers and pruners dying at around 110 workers per 100,000, roughly 30 times the average death rate for all U.S. workers, which sits around 3.3 to 3.5 per 100,000. Zoom out to the broader landscaping and tree care workforce, and you still see fatality rates in the high teens per 100,000, 5 times the norm. Falls from towering trees, limbs breaking loose and crushing workers on the ground, bodies pulled into wood chippers. Electrocutions when a pole or a rigging line kisses a power line. 30 years later, someone in your trade sits in a quiet conference room, signing paperwork that sells his multi-state tree care and vegetation management company to a private equity fund after a decade of rolling up competitors in a utility vegetation market worth tens of billions of dollars worldwide. He operates in the same ecosystem as line clearance giants like Asplunge, which generates an estimated $5+ billion a year just from cutting trees away from power lines. He used to drag brush for an hourly wage. Now he's signing a deal that changes his children's lives. If you like breakdowns of how careers actually progress, like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. You start at the very bottom, the ground worker, the groundie, the one who never leaves the dirt. Your job description is simple. Keep the climber fed with rope, keep the chipper fed with wood, and keep your mouth shut. On paper, the average tree groundsman in the U.S. makes about $18.72 an hour, with the bulk of workers jammed between roughly $16 and $21 an hour, depending on the market. Some tree service companies advertise a bit higher, around $21 an hour for ground worker roles, but only after you've proven you don't break equipment or quit mid-summer. In reality, your day is a sequence of short sprints and near misses. You drag branch after branch, some light, some thick enough that you're effectively deadlifting sections of tree across uneven yards, through gates that barely fit the brush, in mud, in ice, in heat waves where the index climbs over 100. You are the one inside the noise cone of the chipper, feeding in jagged limbs, while that steel drum screams inches from your hands. You can feel, even from the ground, that this is not a normal job. You hear stories: a guy who slipped under a log, another who took a limb to the neck, another who misjudged a hinge and dropped a maple through a living room. You start to understand why the fatal injury rate in this world looks like it belongs to logging, not landscaping. You're making under $20 an hour in an industry where the wrong 10 seconds can literally kill you. So you do what everyone with ambition does. You look up, into the canopy. The ladder to more money doesn't look like a promotion. It looks like gear. You want off the ground, so you start buying your way upward. A real arborist saddle, something like a Weaver Cougar, runs you around $268 before tax. A set of steel climbing spikes, like Notch Gecko gaffs, adds another $279 just to get metal on your legs. A proper climbing helmet that won't explode the first time a limb clips it? Call it $80. Then you need the line. A purpose-made 150-foot climbing rope runs somewhere between $100 and $300, depending on brand and rating. You add several triple locking carabiners at $20 to $40 each, and you don't just buy one, you buy a handful, because you don't want to trust your spine to a single gate. You toss in a hitch climber pulley or a mechanical device, anywhere from $59 to nearly $300 if you go fancy. And then comes the real status symbol of the working arborist, the top handle chainsaw. A professional grade top handle like the ST-Ench MS 201 TCM lists close to $950 MSRP in the US, with dealers commonly pricing it in the low 900s. Piece by piece, your kit starts to look like something. Saddle, spikes, helmet, climbing line, flip line, hardware, and a saw hanging off your hip. By the time you're ready to take your first serious climbs, you're staring at $2,000 to $3,000 worth of gear, most of it paid out of pocket, built on groundy wages. The first time you spike up a 100-foot pine, everything you own is suddenly attached to you. The spikes bite into bark, your rope hums under tension, and the whole tree sways just enough in the wind to remind you that your life depends on knots you tied half awake in the morning. You feel the saw tug at your harness. You look down, and the groundy you were 6 months ago is now a toy. You're finally climbing. You're finally making a little more money. And you're finally positioned where the fatality numbers get really ugly. A few years in, you get fast. You can dismantle a big oak in tight quarters without touching a roof. You understand rigging angles, friction, and swing paths without doing math in your head. Now people start calling you directly. You become what the industry quietly worships, a contract climber. Instead of making an hourly wage, you sell your day. Industry guidance for contract climbers talks openly about day rates between $200 and $1,000, depending on the region and the difficulty of the work. In real-world conversations, seasoned producers, people with a decade plus of experience, talk about charging $700 to $1,200 for a 10-hour day, with some specialists pulling $1,000 to $2,000 for brutal, high-risk removals. You can do the math. At $900 to $1,000 per day, 200 booked days a year means grossing $180,000 to $200,000 before expenses. Utility line clearance climbers in union environments talk about similar numbers once you stack enough overtime and storm work. From the outside, it looks like you've won. On the inside, you are now the person who stands directly in front of the risk. You have watched rigging points fail, an anchor crotch that explodes, a rigging line that lets a piece free fall toward a roof or a coworker. You have seen hands that got a little too close to a chipper infeed. You have seen near contacts with power lines, heard the snap of electricity, and watched the crew get very quiet. Those fatality rate numbers stop being numbers. Roughly 110 deaths per 100,000 tree trimmers and pruners means this work is not just dangerous. It is statistically closer to logging and commercial fishing than to lawn mowing. You start attending funerals. You start counting your close calls. The smart 1% in this world do something different. They use that high-risk phase as a bridge, not a destination. Some move sideways into crane operation. Still intense, but with the saw in someone else's hands and the risk distributed differently. Others pivot hard toward estimating, sales, and management long before their backs and knees are permanently compromised. The ones who survive the longest understand a simple rule. The longer you stay in the canopy, the higher the odds the canopy takes something from you. So they start planning an exit that doesn't involve a hospital. Your next promotion is not a title. It's a loan. You sign for a used bucket truck. You sign for a chipper that costs more than your parents' first house. You sign for insurance policies with numbers that do not feel real. Workers' compensation for tree care carries some of the highest rates in the insurance world because the carriers read the same fatality tables you do. Every extra climber you put on payroll multiplies that bill. Your trucks need commercial insurance. Your chipper needs coverage. Your saws need maintenance. You're on the hook for every deductible when something goes wrong. Now your anxiety has layers. You're not just worried about your own fall. You're worried about a limb punching through a homeowner's roof, a log flattening a fence, or a stray piece of hardware going through a windshield 2 houses over. Every mistake has a dollar figure attached, and that figure is now yours. You are still in the bucket some days, still climbing when the access is bad, but you're also answering calls, pricing jobs, and praying the checks clear before the fuel card maxes out. You've stopped thinking in hourly wages and started thinking in day rates, gross margins, and whether today's work will keep the note paid on the truck. You are no longer just a climber. you are a small business. But right now, it's a business that still depends on your body showing up. The next level is where the game changes. You stop chasing Mrs. Johnson's dead maple and start chasing contracts that don't care what season it is. You bid on municipal line clearance work and commercial property portfolios, HOA contracts, corporate campuses, utility right-of-way maintenance. Instead of one-off jobs, you fight for multi-year agreements where the same miles of line and the same campuses need to be cleared on a schedule. Your world shifts from how many trees can I personally climb this week to how dense can I make this route. Route density, in other words, how many billable stops you can stack inside a small radius, turns your trucks into machines that print predictable revenue. Meanwhile, you're watching the giants. Asplunge is generating around $5 to $6 billion a year, keeping vegetation off power lines, dominating a utility vegetation management market valued around $28 billion globally in 2024. Davey Tree is pulling in roughly $1.7 to $1.8 billion a year, with more than 12,000 employees and a growth story built heavily on acquisitions. You're playing a miniature version of their game. You standardize your crews, build systems, track production per truck per day, and negotiate contracts where the checks arrive whether you personally touch a saw or not. By now, you're out of the bucket. You still know how to climb, but the company makes more money when you're in an office or a pickup, looking at spreadsheets, than when you're 70 feet up on spikes. Your primary tools are scheduling software, routing algorithms, and bid spreadsheets. And somewhere along this path, your company stops being just a tree service. To the outside world, it becomes an asset. In another state, a company like Savitry has already run this play at scale. With backing from CI Capital Partners, they spent years acquiring smaller tree and lawn care companies, completing more than 24 add-on acquisitions, and tripling their revenue while expanding from 28 branches in 12 states to 58 branches in 27 states. Eventually, that platform was sold to another global buyout fund, Apax, in a deal large enough to make headlines even though the exact price was never disclosed. Private equity does not buy a good climber. Private equity buys systems, recurring contracts, route density, trained crews, documented processes, and management teams who can turn trees into predictable cash flow. They look at the same utility vegetation management market numbers you do and see a space where billions of dollars flow every year to whoever can keep the lines clear, the campuses tidy, and the liability low. In your world, the end game looks like this. You spend a decade building a commercial and municipal-focused tree care company with strong recurring contracts, stable margins, and a management layer that does not depend on you climbing. You might bolt on smaller competitors just like Savitry did, folding their trucks and crews into your systems. One day, a larger platform, or a fund that wants to build one, comes knocking. Maybe it's a regional roll-up assembling a footprint across multiple states. Maybe it's a global infrastructure investor that already owns a piece of a line clearance giant like Asplunge, or a portfolio of utility service contractors. They don't ask how fast you can deadwood a maple. They ask about EBITDA, customer concentration, safety record, and contract renewal rates. They ask how many miles of line you maintain, how many campuses you service, and how predictable your revenue really is. And then, if you've built the ladder correctly, they slide a number across the table that makes every 100-pound log you dragged at 19 feel like a different life. You sit in a quiet room, the pen in your hand instead of a chainsaw. You sign a deal that might be worth a lifetime of wages, compressed into a single transaction. You haven't worn a climbing saddle or started a saw on a production job in over 15 years. Someone else is in the canopy now. You've been managing contracts, people, and capital instead of ropes and rigging points. The irony is brutal and simple. The money is not in the canopy. The money is in the commerce.